The hammer fell with a thunderous crack, and Tobias Crow felt his heart slam against his ribs like a caged Mustang. He'd just bid his entire life savings $372, a woman he'd never spoken to. All because her violet eyes had locked with his across the dusty auction yard and set his soul ablaze. "Sold to the gentleman in the torn hat," bellowed Silas Grimm, the auctioneer whose voice could wake the dead in 3 counties. The crowd erupted in whistles and catcalls, but Tobias heard nothing except the blood rushing through his ears as he watched Magnolia Sage step down from the auction block, with a grace that made desert flowers weep with envy. She wasn't being sold. Of course, this was Perdition Creek's annual charity auction, where eligible ladies offered picnic baskets and the company to share them, all to raise funds for the new schoolhouse. But the way she moved through the crowd toward him, her crimson dress flowing like liquid fire, made every man in the territory wish they'd emptied their coffers for the chance. Was that love, cowboy, or just desperation? She asked when she reached him, her voice carrying the smoky sweetness of wild honey mixed with gunpowder. Her smile was dangerous, the kind that started wars and ended them, that made sensible men do foolish things and foolish men do legendary ones. Tobias removed his weather-beaten hat, his calloused hands trembling slightly as he met her gaze. "Ma'am, I reckon I don't know the difference anymore." She laughed then, a sound like silver bells dancing in a thunderstorm, and something inside his chest cracked open like an egg. "Well, Mr. Crow?" "Tobias Crow, ma'am. I work the Broken Arrow Ranch about 10 miles north of here." "Magnolia Sage," she replied, extending a gloved hand that felt like silk and steel when he shook it. "And I suppose you're expecting me to swoon at your grand romantic gesture?" Heat climbed up his neck like wildfire. "No, ma'am, I just good," she interrupted, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Because I don't swoon, ever. But I am curious. About a man who'd spend his winter wages on a picnic with a stranger." Before he could answer, a commotion erupted near the saloon. Darius Blackthorne, son of the territory's wealthiest cattle baron, came striding through the crowd with his usual swagger and a face like a thundercloud. His perfectly oiled mustache twitched with rage as he approached, flanked by 2 hired guns who looked meaner than rattlesnakes in August. "Crow," Blackthorne spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You think you can outbid a Blackthorne and walk away whistling? That woman was meant to be mine." Tobias stepped slightly in front of Magnolia, his hand instinctively moving toward the Colt. At his hip, "The auction's over, Blackthorne." She chose her winner fair and square. Did she now? Blackthorne's cold blue eyes shifted to Magnolia. "Tell me, darling, what could this dusty saddle tramp possibly offer you that I couldn't provide 100 times over?" Magnolia stepped forward, her chin raised in defiance. "He offered honesty, Mr. Blackthorne. Something you wouldn't recognize if it bit you on your pampered behind." The crowd gasped, and Blackthorne's face turned the color of a ripe tomato. His hand moved to his gun, and the air grew thick with the promise of violence. That's when Magnolia did something that shocked everyone. Present she drew her own pearl-handled derringer from beneath her skirts with the speed of a striking serpent and pointed it directly at Blackthorne's chest. "Now, gentlemen," she purred, her voice deadly calm, "I believe we have a picnic to attend." The picnic basket felt heavier than a newborn calf as Tobias carried it toward the old oak grove beyond town, Magnolia walking beside him with the fluid grace of a mountain cat. The late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber, but he couldn't shake the memory of how naturally she'd drawn that derringer, or the way her hand hadn't trembled even slightly when she'd faced down. "Blackthorne, you're mighty quiet for a man who just made the boldest bid in Perdition Creek history," she observed, glancing at him sideways. Her violet eyes held secrets deeper than canyon shadows, and he found himself wondering what kind of woman carried a hidden weapon to a charity auction. "I'm still trying to figure out if I'm the luckiest fool in the territory or the deadest," he admitted, setting the basket down beneath the massive oak's sprawling branches. The tree had stood here longer than anyone could remember. It gnarled, limbs having witnessed countless stories of love, loss, and everything in between. Magnolia laughed, that dangerous silver sound that made his pulse quicken. "Smart man. Most folks around here just see the pretty dress and the sweet smile." She began unpacking the basket, revealing fried chicken that smelled like heaven, fresh bread, a bottle of wine that probably cost more than his monthly wages. They don't bother looking deeper. And what would I see if I looked deeper, Miss Sage? She paused in her unpacking, her hand stilling on a jar of preserves. For a moment, her carefully constructed mask slipped, and he glimpsed something raw and vulnerable beneath. You'd see a woman who's been running from her past for 3 years, hiding in plain sight in a town where nobody asked the right questions. The confession hung between them like smoke from a campfire, heavy and impossible to ignore. Tobias settled beside her on the checkered blanket, close enough to catch the faint scent of jasmine and gunpowder that seemed to cling to her skin. What are you running from? My husband, she said simply, and the words hit him like a physical blow. Or rather, my late husband, Cornelius Vanderwyck of the Boston Vanderwicks. Ever hear of them? He hadn't, but something in her tone told him he should have. Can't say that I have, ma'am. Good. That means I've done my job well. She poured wine into 2 glasses with hands steady as bedrock. He was a monster, Tobias. The kind of man who smiled at charity galas while he broke his wife's ribs in private. When he died, fell down the stairs after a particularly violent episode. His family blamed me. Said I pushed him. Did you? The question slipped out before he could stop it, and he immediately regretted his boldness. But Magnolia just smiled, an expression both sad and fierce. I wished him dead every day for 5 years. When it finally happened, I took what little money I could carry and ran west as far as these legs would take me. Ended up here, in the middle of nowhere, trying to become someone else entirely. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first drops of an evening storm began to fall. Without hesitation, Tobias shrugged out of his coat and held it over both their heads as they quickly gathered the picnic supplies. My ranch is closer, he offered, surprised by his own boldness. We could wait out the storm there, she studied, his face in the fading light seeming to weigh something important. You're not afraid? Of what I might have done? Of what might be chasing me? Ma'am, I've been breaking wild horses since I was 12 years old. Fear's just another emotion that'll get you trampled if you let it. He stood and offered her his hand. Besides, seems to me you've been running long enough. She took his hand, and lightning illuminated the sky as they ran through the rain toward his small cabin, her laughter mixing with the storm-like music he'd been waiting his whole life to hear. But as they splashed through the muddy road, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows near the saloon, or the telegram that had arrived that morning addressed to one Magnolia Vanderwyck. Care of Perdition Creek General Delivery. The cabin door slammed shut behind them as rain hammered the roof like bullets from heaven. Magnolia stood dripping in his modest front room, her crimson dress clinging to curves that made his mouth go dry as desert sand. But it was the way she surveyed his humble home-taking in the neat stack of books. The carefully maintained rifle over the fireplace, the single photograph of his parents on the mantel that told him she was cataloging escape routes. Still, running, even here, he observed quietly, moving to light the oil lamp. The golden glow revealed her more clearly, and he saw something he hadn't noticed before, a thin white scar running along her left temple, barely visible beneath her carefully arranged hair. It becomes a habit, she admitted, wringing water from her dark locks. 3 years of looking over your shoulder tends to make you cautious. Thunder shook the small structure, and she moved toward the fireplace where he was building a fire. Tobias, there's something else you should know. Something about why Blackthorn was so determined to have me today. He paused in arranging the kindling, a cold dread settling in his stomach. What kind of something? He knows who I really am. The words came out in a rush. Not everything, but enough. He's been courting me for months, ever since I arrived in Perdition Creek, making it clear that a woman alone needs protection in this territory, especially one with secrets. The fire caught with a whoosh, casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls, and you've been refusing him. Every advance, every gift, every veiled threat disguised as concern for my welfare. She moved closer to the flames, and he could see, her hands shaking not from cold, but from something deeper. Till today, when you outbid him in front of half the territory, you made him look like a fool, and men like Darius Blackthorn don't forgive that kind of humiliation. Before he could respond, The unmistakable sound of horses approaching through the storm reached their ears. Multiple riders, moving fast despite the weather. Magnolia's face went white as bone china. "They found me," she whispered, and suddenly she was moving with lethal efficiency. The helpless socialite vanished, replaced by someone who'd clearly learned to fight for survival. She checked her derringer, then moved to the window, peering through the rain-streaked glass. "How many?" Tobias asked, automatically reaching for his rifle. "For riders." "Wait." Her voice caught. "Oh, God, that's not Blackthorn's men. I know that horse. That saddle. It's Detective Morrison from Boston. He's been hunting me for 3 years." The riders circled the cabin like wolves, and a voice called out through the storm. "Magnolia Vanderwick. We know you're in there. Come out peacefully, and nobody gets hurt." "Like hell," she spat. And Tobias realized he was seeing the real woman for the first time. Not the mysterious beauty from the auction, but the vulnerable refugee sharing wine beneath an oak tree, but a survivor who'd crawled through hell and emerged harder than tempered steel. "There's a back way out," he said quickly, moving to a loose floorboard near the kitchen. "Root cellar connects to an old mine shaft. Comes up about a quarter-mile north, near the creek." "You don't understand," she said, turning to face him. "In the firelight, her eyes blazed with desperate determination. "They'll burn this place to the ground looking for me. They'll destroy your life just because you helped me. Then we better make sure they don't catch us." She stared at him for a long moment. "Why? Why would you risk everything for a woman you met 6 hours ago? A woman who might be a murderer?" The answer came from someplace deeper than thought, truer than reason. "Because when you looked at me across that auction yard, something inside me recognized something inside you. Because I'd rather die standing with you than live knowing I let them take you." Tears spilled down her cheeks, the first real emotion he'd seen her let slip completely. Tobias... It. The front door exploded inward, and Detective Morrison stepped through with his gun drawn, flanked by 2 deputies and, to Tobias's, shocked Darius. Blackthorn himself. "Oh well," Morrison said, his Boston accent sharp as broken glass. The infamous widow and her latest conquest. "Though I have to say, Mrs. Vanderwick, you've certainly come down in the world since Boston." Blackthorn's smile was pure poison. "I tried to offer her protection, Detective. Tried to save her from herself. But some women just won't listen to reason." "And that's when Magnolia did something that shocked everyone in the room," she started. Laughing, the sound of Magnolia's laughter filled the cabin like wildfire, dangerous and unpredictable. Detective Morrison's confidence wavered as she stepped fully into the lamplight. No longer the hunted woman, but something altogether more formidable. "Oh, Detective Morrison," she said, her voice carrying a new edge that made even Blackthorn shift. Uncomfortably. "Did you really think I'd run all the way to this godforsaken territory just to hide in another man's shadow?" "You murdered your husband," Morrison stated flatly, though his gun hand trembled slightly. "Cornelius Vanderwick died under suspicious circumstances, and you fled with $50,000 in jewels and bearer bonds. Cornelius died because he was a drunk, violent fool who couldn't navigate his own staircase after beating his wife senseless," she replied coldly. "But you're wrong about one thing, Detective. I didn't take $50,000 worth of valuables when I left Boston." She moved to Tobias's small table and began removing items from beneath her skirts with practiced efficiency. Not just the derringer, but lockpicks, a small pouch of what looked like diamonds, and several official-looking documents. It took closer to $200,000, and I've been using it very productively these past 3 years. Blackthorn's eyes widened with naked greed. $200,000? "Oh yes, Darius. Did you think I was just some helpless widow playing dress-up in your little frontier town?" Her smile was razor-sharp. "I've been buying up mineral rights across this territory under various names. Turns out there's silver in them hills, and lots of it. I own the claims to half the mountainside north of here." Tobias felt the world tilt. On its axis, the woman he'd thought he was saving had been playing a game far more complex than he'd imagined. "Which brings us to you, my dear Darius," she continued, turning that predatory smile on Blackthorn. "You've been so helpful, providing information about local land sales, territorial politics, which officials could be bought. I do hope you enjoyed our little conversations. The cattle baron's face went from greed to rage to something approaching terror. You used me mercilessly. And Detective Morrison, your timing is actually perfect. You see, I've been planning to return to Boston for months, now but on my terms, with enough evidence to destroy the Vanderwyck family's reputation forever. She held up one of the documents.
Ow!
Turns out dear Cornelius wasn't just beating his wife. He was embezzling from his father's shipping company, selling arms to Confederate sympathizers during the war, and running opium through Boston Harbor. Morrison's gun wavered. That's impossible. The Vanderwicks are one of Boston's most respected families. It's built on blood money and brutality, and now I have the proof. She looked directly at Tobias, and her expression softened slightly. Going to disappear tonight, regardless. Take my fortune and start fresh somewhere else, maybe California or Mexico. But then this cowboy went and bid his life savings on a picnic basket, looking at me like I was something precious instead of something broken. The cabin fell silent, except for the rain drumming on the roof. Tobias felt like he was seeing her. Clearly for the first time not victim or villain, but a woman who'd learned to weaponize everything, even her own vulnerability. So what now? He asked quietly. Before she could answer, one of Morrison's deputies spoke up. Detective, we've got riders approaching. A lot of them. Through the broken door came the sound of hoofbeats, dozens of them. Blackthorn paled. That's impossible. My men are back at the ranch. Magnolia's smile returned, triumphant and fierce. No, Darius, those are my men. Did you think I'd spend 3 years in this territory without making the right friends? Sheriff Matthews owes me several favors, and the miners I've been secretly employing are very loyal. The cabin filled with armed men, but they weren't pointing their weapons at Magnolia. They were surrounding Morrison and his deputies. Sheriff Matthews stepped through the doorway, rain dripping from his badge. Evening, folks. Miss Sager, should I say, Mrs. Vanderwicker, telegram arrived this afternoon. Everything's been arranged, just like you requested. Tobias watched in amazement as the woman he'd thought he was rescuing orchestrated the capture of her pursuers with the precision of a military general. But when she turned back to him, her eyes held something he hadn't expected to see. Genuine uncertainty. No, this isn't what you bargained for when you bid on that picnic basket, she said softly. A woman with a fortune and stolen jewels, half the territorial government in her pocket, and enough secrets to start a war. He looked at her, really looked, seeing the scars and the strength, the vulnerability hidden beneath layers of careful planning. The woman who'd learned to survive by becoming dangerous, but hadn't forgotten how to hope. Was that love? He asked, echoing her words from the auction, or just desperation. The question hung in the air like gun smoke. And for the first time since he'd known her, Magnolia Sajor, Magnolia Vanderwyck, or whoever she truly was beneath all the names and schemes, looked genuinely uncertain. Sheriff Matthews was busy, shackling Morrison and his deputies, while her hired men kept their rifles trained on a furious Blackthorn. The cabin had become a command center, but all Tobias could see was the woman standing before him, rainwater still dripping from her dark hair, waiting for his verdict on everything she'd just revealed. You want the truth? She asked, her voice barely audible above the storm. Came to that auction today, planning to disappear afterward. Win or lose, I was going to take my fortune and vanish into the night. But when you looked at me across that crowd, when you bid everything you had just for the chance to share a meal with me, ... She paused, swallowing hard. It was the first time in 5 years anyone had looked at me like I was worth something just as I was, not for what I could provide or what I represented. Tobias stepped closer, ignoring the armed men and the chaos swirling around them. And now I'm terrified, she admitted. Because for the first time since I fled Boston, I want to stay somewhere, with someone. And that makes me vulnerable in ways that all the money and planning in the world can't protect against. Before he could respond, Blackthorn's voice cut through the tension like a knife. You fools. Do you think this ends here? The Vanderwyck family has connections across the country. They'll send federal marshals, Pinkerton agents, the army if they have to. And when they come, They'll burn this entire territory to find her. Magnolia turned to face him, her composure returning like armor sliding into place. Oh, Darius. Still. Trying to salvage something from this disaster?
Ow.
Disappointing. She pulled out one of the documents she'd retrieved earlier. Sheriff Matthews, would you be so kind as to read this aloud? It's a telegraph I received this morning from Boston. The sheriff unfolded the paper, squinting in the lamplight. It's from Jeremiah Vanderwyck, head of the Vanderwyck family. It says stop. All charges dropped. Stop. Father confessed before death. Stop. Fortune yours by right. Stop. Come home when ready. Stop. The silence that followed was deafening. Morrison's face went white as sheet, and Blackthorne looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Old Cornelius finally grew a conscience on his deathbed, Magnolia explained conversationally. Confessed to his father about the embezzling the arms. Dealing everything. Admitted he'd been beating me, that I'd never done anything but try to survive his rages. The family patriarch was so horrified that he legally transferred all of Cornelius's holdings to me before he died last month. She moved to the window, gazing out at the storm. So you see, Detective Morrison, you've been chasing a ghost? The state of Massachusetts considers me a victim, not a criminal. The only person who wanted me brought back was Cornelius's brother, Marcus, and he was hoping to get his hands on the inheritance. Tobias felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. Oh, you're free. You could go back to Boston, reclaim your place in society, live like a queen? I could, she agreed, not turning from the window. I have a mansion on Beacon Hill, shares in 3 shipping companies, and enough money to buy half of Massachusetts, if I wanted to. She was quiet for a long moment, then added, but I've gotten rather fond of wide-open spaces and men who bid their life savings on charity auctions. The hope that bloomed in his chest was dangerous as dynamite. Magnolia, ... There's just one problem, she continued, finally turning back to face him. Not sure who I am anymore. For 3 years I've been Magnolia Sage, mysterious woman of means, carefully constructed from necessity and survival instincts. Before that, I was Mrs. Cornelius Vanderwyck, society wife and professional victim. I haven't been just ... me ... So long, I'm not sure that person still exists. Sheriff Matthews cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps we should continue this conversation after I've disposed of these gentlemen. Miss Sage, what would you like me to do with them? Detective Morrison gets escorted to the territorial border with instructions never to return. Mr. Blackthorne can explain to his father why he's been collaborating with someone he thought was a wanted criminal. Her smile was sharp enough, too. Cut glass. And Detective, do give my regards to the Vanderwyck family. Tell them I'm considering my options. As the law enforcement drama played out around them, Tobias found himself studying the woman who'd turned his world upside down in the span of a single day. Wealthy heiress, cunning strategist, survivor of violence, keeper of secrets. She was all of these things and more. But beneath it all, he sensed something else. A woman who'd forgotten how to trust her own heart. What if we figured it out together? He asked quietly. Figured what out? Who you are when you're not running, not planning, not protecting yourself from the next threat, just ... Who you are when you're safe. The storm outside began to soften. Through the broken door came the sound of riders departing as Sheriff Matthews's men escorted the prisoners away. Soon, it would be just the two of them again, alone with the choice that would determine everything that came next. Dawn broke over the territory like a promise, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and sharp with the scent of wet sage and possibility. Tobias stood on his front porch, watching Sheriff Matthews and the last of his men disappear down the muddy road, taking Blackthorne and Morrison's deputies with them. The detective himself had been sent packing with a warning that would keep him out of New Mexico territory for the foreseeable future. Behind him, he could hear Magnolia moving around the cabin, the domestic sound of coffee being prepared. Dishes being quietly arranged felt both foreign and deeply right after the chaos of the night before. It's beautiful here, she said from the doorway, joining him on the porch with 2 steaming cups. She'd borrowed one of his clean shirts, and seeing her in his clothes did something dangerous to his equilibrium. It grows on you, he replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. I reckon it's not quite what you're used to, coming from Boston mansions and such. You'd be surprised what I'm used to. She settled beside him on the porch steps, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. Tobias, there's something I need to tell you. Something I haven't told anyone in 3 years. He waited, sensing that whatever came next would matter more than all the revelations of the previous night. My real name isn't Magnolia Sage or even Magnolia Vanderwyck, she said quietly, staring out at the sunrise. It's Maggie O'Sullivan. I was born in a tenement in Boston's Irish district, daughter of a dock worker who died when I was 12. I married Cornelius when I was 17, not for love, but because his family needed respectability and mine needed money. The confession hung between them like morning mist, fragile and beautiful. I spent years learning to walk like a lady, talk like a lady, be the perfect society wife. But underneath all those lessons, underneath all those carefully constructed personas, I was still just Maggie O'Sullivan, a girl who dreamed of wide-open spaces and men who said what they meant.
Alice?
Tobias set down his coffee cup and turned to face her fully. And what does Maggie O'Sullivan want now? Tears glistened in her eyes, but her voice was steady. She wants to stop running. She wants to wake up in the morning without checking the exits. She wants to find out what it's like to be loved for who she really is, not for what she can provide or what she represents. And if I told you that Tobias Crow, failed rancher and occasional fool, has been half in love with you since you smiled, add him across that auction yard wood that mattered to Maggie O'Sullivan. Her breath caught, and for a moment the carefully constructed mask slipped completely away, revealing something raw and hopeful and achingly vulnerable. It would matter. More than all the money in Boston, she whispered. He reached out and touched her face, his thumb tracing the scar at her temple. This is from him, isn't it? Your husband? She nodded, not pulling away from his touch. The last time he hit me, the night before he fell down those stairs, used to cover it with powder and careful hair arrangements. But lately I've been thinking, it shouldn't be hidden. It's part of my story, part of what made me strong enough to survive. It's part of what makes you beautiful, he said simply, and meant it completely. Something shifted in the air between them, electric as summer lightning. She leaned closer, and he could smell jasmine and rain in her hair, could see gold flecks in her violet eyes that he'd missed before. Tobias, she said softly, I need you. To understand something, I have enough money to buy half this territory, enough influence to make or break political careers, enough secrets to start wars. If you kiss me now, if we go down this road together, you'll never just be a simple ranch hand again. Your life will become complicated in ways you can't imagine. He studied her face, memorizing every detail, the determined set of her jaw, the hope she was trying so hard to hide, the way morning light turned her skin to gold. Maggie O'Sullivan, he said carefully. I've been breaking wild horses since I was 12 years old, and I've learned something important. The most beautiful things in this world are worth a little complication. She smiled then, not the dangerous smile of Magnolia Sage, or the practiced smile of Mrs. Vanderwyck, but something entirely new, the smile of a woman remembering how to hope. When he kissed her, it tasted like freedom and possibility and the promise of everything they could build together. And for the first time in 3 years, Maggie O'Sullivan stopped looking over her shoulder and started looking toward the future. In the distance, a meadowlark sang its liquid song to the dawn, and the sound of it was like a benediction on whatever came next. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the expanded cabin, no longer the modest structure where they'd weathered that storm, but a proper home with added rooms, a real kitchen, and a front porch wide enough for 2 rocking chairs and a view that stretched to the horizon. Tobias stood in the doorway of what had become their bedroom, watching his wife brush her long, dark hair at the vanity he'd had shipped from Denver. She caught his eye in the mirror and smiled. That smile that still had the power to stop his heart mid-beat, though now it carried none of the careful calculation he'd first seen at the auction. This was Maggie's smile, open and unguarded, and entirely his. The territorial governor is coming for dinner tonight, she said conversationally, securing her. Hair with pins. And Senator Morrison, no relation to that detective, thankfully wants to discuss the railroad spur. Any particular reason half the territory's government wants to eat at our table? She laughed, rising to smooth the wrinkles from her dress, practical calico now instead of silk, though she still moved with that same fluid grace that had first caught his attention, because your wife owns mineral rights that could make this territory rich beyond imagining, and these men want to ensure those rights benefit everyone, not just distant Boston investors. It had taken weeks to sort through the legal complexities of her situation. The Vanderwyck family had indeed dropped all charges and transferred her inheritance, but accepting it had meant revealing her location to powerful people in the East. The compromise they'd reached, brokered by Sheriff Matthews and territorial officials who'd come to respect Maggie's sharp mind and generous heart, satisfied everyone involved. She would develop her mining claims in partnership with local investors and territorial government, ensuring the wealth stayed in New Mexico instead of flowing back to eastern banks. In return, she received legal protection and the freedom to live openly as Mrs. Tobias Crow, respected citizen and businesswoman. Speaking of business, Tobias said, moving to help her with the buttons on her dress, Jake Wilson stopped by this morning. Says the Silver Bell mine is producing better than anyone expected. He wanted me to ask if you'd consider backing his expansion plans. What did you tell him? That he'd have to convince you himself. I may be your husband, but I'm not fool enough to think that makes me your business partner without invitation. She turned in his arms, her eyes sparkling with the mischief he'd grown to love. Smart man. Oh, you might be interested to know that I've been thinking about taking on a partner, someone who understands horses and cattle and the land better than any Boston businessman ever could. Anyone I know? Well, he's handsome in a rough sort of way, completely unsuitable by Boston standards. And he once spent his life savings on a picnic basket just to spend an afternoon with a stranger. Sounds like a fool to me. It's the best kind of fool. She agreed, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. The kind who sees something worth fighting for and doesn't hesitate to act on it. A knock at the front door interrupted them, followed by a familiar voice calling out, "Mr. and Mrs. Crow." "It's Sheriff Matthews. Got some visitors here you might want to meet." They made their way to the front porch, where the sheriff waited with an older couple who looked travel-worn but dignified. The woman bore a striking resemblance to Maggie, though her hair was silver and her hands bore the calluses of hard work. "Maggie," the woman said tentatively, hope and uncertainty warring in her voice. "Is that really you, child?" Maggie's breath caught. "Aunt Bridget? Uncle Patrick? But how did you find me?" "The Vanderwyck boy, Marcus, I think his name was, he came looking for family members. Wanted to make sure you had people who cared about you, people who knew the truth about what that monster did to you." The older woman's eyes filled with tears. "We've been searching for you for months, girl. Had no idea what had become of you after you disappeared from Boston." What followed was a reunion 3 years in the making, filled with tears and laughter and the kind of explanations that can only come from family who love unconditionally. Uncle Patrick, it turned out, had struck silver in Colorado and done well, enough to buy a small ranch. Aunt Bridget had never stopped believing that her sister's daughter would find her way home eventually, as the sun climbed higher. More visitors arrived. Neighbors from surrounding ranches, business partners from town, territorial officials who'd come to respect both Maggie's acumen and her commitment to building something lasting in their corner of the world. The simple dinner they'd planned became an impromptu celebration, the kind of gathering that happens when good people find reason to rejoice together. Later that evening, as the last guests departed and the stars emerged in brilliant profusion overhead, Tobias and Maggie sat in their rocking chairs on the front porch, her head on his shoulder and his arm around her waist. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked quietly. "The excitement, the danger, the feeling of always being one step ahead of disaster?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then I wake up next to you, and I look out at land that's ours, at a future we're building together, and I remember what peace it feels like. And if you could go back to that auction day, knowing everything that would happen, would you still bid on that picnic basket?" She lifted her head to look at him, her violet eyes reflecting starlight. "Mr. Crow, I would have bid against you just to see what kind of man would risk everything for a chance at love."